Okay, thank you so much, Shmuley. I really appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the hosting of this talk. So, as you can see, we're going to talk about conscious machines. This is actually one lecture in a course that I give on ethics and big data and artificial intelligence. I'll just start by giving you a little bit of an introduction into who I am, even though you just heard. So, first and foremost, I'm an engineer. I've designed computer systems for 35 years. I worked for small companies. I worked for big companies. In the end, I worked for a small company that became a very big company by the name of Mobileye. So Mobileye is basically powering the autonomous vehicle revolution. I designed this chip along with some of my friends. And that's really, I think, the peak of my design career. However, as much as I like designing computer systems and solving puzzles, I think the greatest puzzle that always puzzled me is what are we doing here and how are we supposed to live? And so that brought me to go and learn Torah in a yeshiva. For 16 years, I designed chips at Mobileye. 6 of those years, I went 2 nights a week to a yeshiva called Merkaz Harav, which is about 10, 15 minutes from Mobileye. And I got my smicha, my rabbinic ordination. And so I'm also an engineer and I'm a rabbi. But then that wasn't enough to actually quench my thirst for these huge questions. And so I went back to school. I went to Bar Ilan University and got my master's and my PhD in Jewish philosophy. I combined all of these interests and I wrote my dissertation called The Moral Status of Artificial Intelligence. Basically, how are we supposed to interact with machines that look and act and sound like us? And which like ChatGPT is a classic example of. But then what we're going to talk about today is not the machines of today, ChatGPT, etc., but the machines of tomorrow, and that is conscious AI. And so putting all of these things together, I was asked to make a course at Ben-Gurion University. I teach a required course for all engineers, for data scientists and information scientists. 200 people every quarter have to go through my class. It's the only humanities class that they take, where I teach them how to think ethically and how to bring ethics in general and Jewish ethics in particular to bear on the questions that all of the new technologies are raising. This has basically become my mission, is to integrate Jewish thought into modern ethical dilemmas. And I do that not just because I'm a Jew and not just because I'm a rabbi, because if you think about it, the Jews have been thinking and writing and applying these kinds of questions, ethical dilemmas, for 3,000 years. There is no other people on the face of the earth, by the way, that not only has thought about these things and wrote about these things, but has lived it. Our moral approach is not theoretical or abstract. It's a lived experience. There's a Rosh Yeshiva in Israel from Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rav Meidan. He said that our ethical dilemmas are not thought experiments. They're written in our blood. So this is significant that we can come and apply all of our moral history to serious questions that are being raised by modern technology. And like I said, that has basically have become my raison d'etre. I go around the world when I'm not teaching at Ben-Gurion, giving lectures like this. And so without further ado, this is the agenda for this talk. I break it up into 3 sections. The first section is an introduction into consciousness. What exactly is consciousness? What does that give us? And then we're going to talk about machine consciousness. How do we expect to actually implement consciousness in machines? And finally, the third section is conscious machines, where we talk about the ethical implications of building conscious machines. Okay, so let us begin. I like to start by showing this one little clip. You know, people have been thinking about conscious machines for a long time. This is actually from my youth. I mean, if we're doing this for the Jewish Studies Department, so who better to start that with Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. So this is Young Frankenstein.
Life! Life, do you hear me? Give my creation! Ah!
Okay. So basically what Frankenstein is about making a being, a conscious being. When he says give my creation life, he's talking about investing this being with a soul, or what we call today a mind consciousness. So that brings us to the first issue. What is the difference between a soul and a mind, between consciousness and souls? What exactly is that about? So the fact of the matter is that the idea of a mind was brought, or the term was coined in the early Enlightenment period by one of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, John Locke. Okay, if you go on the street in any English-speaking country, so there's no difference between what's going on in your head, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your brain. It's all the same. But in philosophy, there's a thing called the philosophy of mind. And mind is actually a reserved word. It means that place where things, your thoughts take place. It's a metaphysical. Metaphysical means above the physical, right? So your brain is physical, your mind is metaphysical. Okay. And so what happened is that the fact of the matter is that mind and soul are really the same thing. John Locke came up with this idea of mind in order to remove the religious aspects that come along when you say soul. Because in the Enlightenment, they want to talk about ideas and not talk about religion. So John Locke in 1690 said consciousness is the perception of what passes in a man's own mind. Your perception of what goes on in your mind. For now, I'll bring you an introduction to the Philosophy of Mind textbook by the Professor John Hyle. So he says as follows: I have used the word mind here, but Plato and Aristotle speak of souls. One question you might ask is whether mind and soul are synonyms, or whether minds and souls are in fact quite different. Although nowadays we use mind and soul more or less interchangeably. Okay, so mind and soul basically are the same thing. Now he's going to tell you what's the difference. It is likely that what the Greeks meant by soul is not quite what we mean by mind. Talk of souls has moral and religious overtones missing in talks of minds. So basically what he's saying is this: functionally, they're the same thing. A mind and a soul allow us to think about the world, to perceive the world, okay? The only difference is that a soul has reward and punishment, a soul has an eternal life, and minds do not. Minds are things that are here in your head today, okay? It's an Enlightenment term to move away from religion. But at the end of the day, whatever we say about souls is what we say about minds, and minds are souls. There's another philosopher by the name of Ted Peters. He says the Greek word for which we get our words psychology, psychiatry, and psyche can be translated either as soul or mind. In ancient Greece, that was the word for soul. It's what allows you to think and experience the world. And we can see that also in Jewish sources. We just read in the Parshat Shavua. I have to come over here somehow. It says, "Vayitzar Hashem Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayipach ba'apav nishmat ha'chaim." God created man from the earth, and he blew into him the soul of life. So Rashi here says, what is this soul? What is this nefesh chaya that man becomes? He says also animals have a nefesh chaya, have a living soul. So what's the difference between the living soul of a human and a living soul of an animal? He says that the human being has deya v'dibur. The human being has intellect and the capacity for speech. That's what distinguishes between animals and human beings. We both have this kind of spiritual aspect. Animals also have consciousness. They experience the world, but they can't really think much more than we will see in a minute. What's the difference between their thinking and our thinking? But in any case, also the Ramban says that the soul is what allows you to think, and it allows you to speak, and it allows you to feel what we call sentience, the ability to feel the world. And it says, and yase kol amase, and it allows you to do everything that a human being does. So again, in Jewish sources, the description of a soul also parallels this idea in secular sources of a mind. Okay? Okay. So now what exactly does consciousness give us? So first of all, it separates from the animate and the inanimate, right? Chairs, tables, cars, they don't have a soul. And so they don't have consciousness. They don't feel, they don't have emotions, they don't have pain and pleasure. Consciousness is what allows us to feel. And also there's a famous philosopher by the name of James Moore, and he says that there are different types of ethical agents, beings in the world that perform ethical acts. So a full ethical agent is a human being who has consciousness and understands the actions that he does, good or bad. A autonomous weapon also performs ethical actions. It actually decides who will live and who will die, but it doesn't understand what is live and what is die, right? So that's that's an explicit ethical agent. It explicitly performs ethical tasks, but it doesn't have consciousness to really understand what it's doing. So that's another aspect of what consciousness gives us. And then the difference between a human being and an animal has sentience, the ability to feel pain and pleasure. A human being also has another layer, what we call sapience. It has the ability to think, to reason. I like to give the example of a steak. If a dog sees a steak, okay, it sees a steak. What's called first order consciousness. It understands steak, and it understands maybe the properties of the steak, red, juicy, food. It will come with a threat of or not. It has certain properties, the steak. It only can think about the steak, as opposed to human beings who can also think about thinking. We can translate the steak to mean something else to us. We can translate it into economic terms and stop thinking about the red juicy steak and think about the $50 it's going to cost us. And then we can start thinking about how does that play into our economics, and we can think about thinking. Animals do not do that. First order consciousness, steak. People have second order and higher order thinking. So that's another important, I would say, distinction of consciousness, that yes, animals are conscious, but it's limited. Human beings have second order, what's called phenomenal consciousness, meaning we can experience the world as well as think about those experiences. And then finally, I think the most important aspect here, if we're going to talk about computers, is what's the difference between a computer and a human being? So that brings us to the famous thought experiment called the Chinese room, that was thought up by John Searle, who just passed away, I think, like 2 weeks ago. He was a professor at University of UC Berkeley. He said, well, instead of me explaining to you what he said, let's watch the PBS version of the Chinese room.
The experiment goes like this. I'm locked in a room. Outside, there's someone who only communicates in Chinese. She writes out some questions and then posts those to me in the room.
Now, I don't speak Chinese, but I do have these books, and they give me instructions on exactly what to do with these symbols. So I look in the book, and if I can find a match to the symbols, then the book tells me exactly how to respond. So I can look up this response. That matches, so now I can post this as the reply to the message I received.
When our Chinese speaker receives the message, it makes perfect sense to her.
您最喜欢哪一本书？哪里是中国的首都？你梦里梦到什么？
As far as she's concerned, we're having a conversation in her language.
Just by following a set of instructions, I can convince somebody on the outside that I speak Chinese. And if I have a large enough set of response books, I can have a conversation about anything. But here's the important part. I, the operator, do not understand Chinese. I can manipulate symbols all day long, but none of it has any meaning to me.
The argument goes that this is just what happens inside a computer. No matter how sentient it seems, the computer is only ever following instructions, manipulating symbols.
Now, not everybody agrees with this interpretation of the Chinese room. Some people point out that although the operator doesn't understand Chinese, the system as a whole, the operator plus the books, does understand Chinese.
Okay, so that's the Chinese room. Basically, if you understood, what he's saying is that the person inside the room doesn't understand anything. It's symbols. And you can put together those symbols. If you understand, you have enough instruction set, and you can communicate. That's what computers do. Computer, you can ask a computer, what is 2 plus 2? It will tell you 4. It doesn't know what is 2, what is plus, or what is 4. It just knows that these things go together like that. Okay? So that is the idea of meaning. And that is what consciousness gives us. We have understanding. We have meaning to what we do. We understand what 2 plus 2 is. Now, this last point, I leave it in the clip where he says that the system as a whole. There are philosophers who put this idea forth. Personally, I think it's totally ridiculous. It's like the chip that I designed to control the car doesn't understand everything, but the whole car does. I don't buy it. But anyway, now you understand the idea of symbol manipulation and what consciousness does give us. Okay, so at the end of the day, that we get to this issue of the hard problem of consciousness. David Chalmers is one of the great philosophers of mind. He's originally from Australia. He teaches at NYU. Many years ago, he coined this term, the hard problem of consciousness, meaning we can explain all kinds of things like I just did to you about consciousness, but there's one thing we have no idea. For decades, people have tried to solve this question, and there's no answer. It goes like this. We have a brain, okay, and that brain processes signals, and you can put probes in my brain, and you can see, oh, you know, this neuron just clicked, it's because he's happy, or this neuron clicked and it's because he's in pain. And so basically we can take the brain, the physical network that's going on here, and you can kick me in the shins, and there's this nerve signal that's going to go to this neuron, and then this neuron is going to tell this neuron, scream. And then my mouth is going to open up and I'm going to say, ow. Okay? We can see all of that on scopes and there's no issue. So now what David Chalmers says is like this. There's the physical layer, the brain, okay? And people call it that what goes on there, functional consciousness, access consciousness. It's not consciousness that you really feel anything. It's just processing, okay? He says, then there's the metaphysical, what we talked about, the mind or the soul. And that is where you experience the world. The fact that I got kicked in the shin isn't just an electronic signal that went and said, open your mouth and say, ow. I actually feel pain, but you can't see that with a million probes in my brain. You can't see the pain, and you have no idea what is that pain to me versus kicking the shins of my wife, which will be far louder, I assure you. So the way it works is like this. David Chalmers says the hard problem with consciousness is why is the performance of any of these functions, kick, shin, scream, accompanied by experience, i.e. pain. Okay? We have no idea. Nobody knows why this happened. We can explain, just like we explain all kinds of physical circuitry, and we can say this happened because this happened because this happened, and it's a closed loop. We have no idea why this feeling happens. And so there are people who explain that, there are some people who explain you're just watching a movie. And the fact that you went to go get water because you thought you were thirsty, no, that your stomach told your brain, get some water, and you're just watching this movie. It's called epiphenomenalism. Not everybody buys this. There are different ways to try to explain the hard problem of consciousness that at the end of the day, everybody agrees we have no idea. Okay? So much so, what's really interesting, since this is being put on by the Jewish Studies Department, the Ramah, Moshe Israelis, says as follows. He's talking about the blessing that you say when you leave the bathroom, and you say, Asher yatzar Adam b'chokhmah uvara bo nekabim v'kamim chalim v'lim. And then you say that, thank you, God, that you have created me with all of these physical capacities. And then he says, umafli lasot, and you did wonders in the creation of man. So now the Ramah, the Moshe Israelis, he's troubled. What is this wonders in the creation of the human being? So he writes as follows, mafli lasot, hi b'ma sheha'el shomer ruach ha'adam b'kirbo, v'kosher davar ruchani b'davar gashmi. The miraculous thing of the human being is that God has somehow put together the spiritual with the physical, the mind with the body. It's exactly what David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness is, that religious people obviously attribute that to God's creation of putting together the soul and the body. But in any case, what I'm saying is that it was amazing to religious people, and I believe in the 13th century. It's amazing to people today in the 20th and 21st century. Okay. What I'd like to do as just one last piece to get you to understand how amazing this is and what is the difference between consciousness and not conscious, between a machine and not a machine. So I designed the chip that tracks cars, okay, that follows cars one by one, frame by frame. I have to follow this car around the road. Inside a chip, okay, there are no pictures. There are pixels, little dots of color. And the fact of the matter is that color is very computation intensive. It takes a lot of computing power. So we use black and white, but the black and white also doesn't exist in computers. There are numbers. And so basically we represent pictures by a stream of numbers. And now you can begin to make calculations, okay? You can do all kinds of numerical manipulations in order to follow the car. Why do I tell you all of this? To explain to you that there is exactly what goes on in our computers is what goes on in our brains. The fact of the matter is I have a chip, and inside the chip, there's a circuit board, wires that connect up a transistor. A transistor is a switch. So what I'm saying is that just like a computer has a housing, a circuit board, and at the bottom it's switches, so too the human being, the brain has a switch called a neuron. It has a wiring up of a neural network through axons housed in this giant brain that we have, okay? So at the end of the day, both of these computing elements look very similar and process exactly the same things. So what's the difference? What I'm trying to say is that the difference between the processing that goes on in a computer versus the processing that goes on in the brain is experience. When my chip follows this car, it says, and it gets too close, it says beep, beep, beep. When I get close, I say, wow. This wow is experience. This wow is phenomenal consciousness. This wow is something that computers don't have when they manipulate symbols. Okay, so now that you understand the hard problem of consciousness and you understand consciousness, so basically we get to Thomas Nagel, who summarizes what is consciousness. Thomas Nagel was a smart Jew in the 20th century. In 1974, he published an article, is a seminal article on consciousness called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? What is it like to be a bat? He basically says as follows: conscious experience is a widespread phenomenon, but no matter how the form may vary, whether it's a person or a bat, the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means basically that there is something it is like to be that organism. There is nothing it is like to be a chair. The chair feels nothing. And so he says, we may call this the subjective character of experience. Each one of us experiences the world subjectively in our own way. And no one can put a probe and tell you, oh, I know how you're feeling. No, but every person has this subjective experience, and that is what we call conscious experience. That's what consciousness gives us. So why am I going through all of these things to tell you is that if we're going to ask what is the moral status of an entity that has phenomenal consciousness, that experiences the world, that thinks about thinking, that has sentience, basically what I'm describing is a human being. And so I think, therefore I added a couple lines to make this more understandable from Descartes' better statement, but I think phenomenally, meaning I'm not just a machine, therefore I am very human-like. Basically, what I want to say is that if we build a machine that has phenomenal consciousness, we have built a human being. Okay? And so now the question becomes, there's two questions of should we do it, but before we get to that, who thinks that they're going to build a human being? How does anybody think that they're going to make a conscious being? So there are three primary approaches. Okay? The first one is called computationalism. And the computationalists say something very simple, okay? Your brain, we say it is a computer. It's a super duper computer. It makes all kinds of calculations. And so if we can build a machine that has the performance and power of a human brain, consciousness will emerge. It will just happen. Consciousness is something that comes out once you have enough computing power like in a human brain. There are many people who believe this. There are people who write against it. For example, Roger Penrose, for those of you who aren't familiar, he's a Nobel Prize-winning mathematician and physicist. He writes that consciousness does not equal computation. He says, consciousness seems to me to be such an important phenomenon that I simply cannot believe that it is something that just accidentally was conjured up by complicated computation. It is the phenomenon whereby the universe's very existence is made known. What he's saying is that the fact that we have consciousness is what allows us to appreciate the world, right? If we didn't have consciousness, so we're zombies, right? And so he says it can't be, even though he defines himself as agnostic. I'm not atheist, but I can't say if there's a God or there isn't. But this sounds very religious. What he's saying is, I can't believe that something so important as consciousness would just happen accidentally. Anyway, he says it can't be just from computation. He says, is it not obvious that mere computation cannot evoke pleasure or pain, that it cannot perceive poetry or the beauty of an evening sky, etc., etc.? So now there's another guy that agrees with him. There's many. Colin Hales is an interesting physicist, engineer from Melbourne. And he says, if you want to get consciousness, you need replication, not emulation. What he means to say by that is, you think you just need to make the computation of a brain and that's going to give you consciousness? No. You need to replicate how the brain works. You need to replicate what's going on inside the brain. So he gives many examples. He says like this. In the center column, you have things that are in nature. Let's take, for example, the bird. Okay, the bird flies. We can emulate that in a computer. We call it a flight simulator. You can put a pilot inside a flight simulator and he will feel like he's flying, but he hasn't got off the ground by 1 inch, right? It's just an emulation, or what we call a simulation, all right? If you want to fly, you need to replicate the physics of the bird. You need to be able to make lift and etc. and all the physics that goes into flying. So now he goes through all of these things and he gets to the brain. He said, if you make a computer that works like the brain, you have made artificial intelligence. That's lovely. But you are not going to get consciousness. If you want the physics, the physical consciousness, the metaphysical part of it to emerge, you need to build a machine that mimics, that replicates the physics of the brain. And so he says, We need to replicate the brain's charge, the current, electromagnetic field. There's a lot of physics going on inside our brain besides just switching switches. Okay? So now, like him, there are many people that are trying to do things where you replicate the brain's physiology. And then there's the third approach, and that is the biological approach. There's a professor by the name of Bernard Kastrup, and he says research on artificial intelligence, an objectively measurable property that can unquestionably be engineered, is conflated with artificial consciousness. So he said there are two things. There's artificial intelligence, that's what we have today, computers that calculate like people. And then there's artificial consciousness. He said that's something else. And you're not going to get it by building supercomputers. He said, the problem is that the presence of intelligence does not imply the presence of consciousness. Whereas a computer may effectively emulate the information processing that occurs in a human brain, this does not mean that the calculations performed by the computer will be accompanied by private inner experience. He gives the example of a kidney. We can emulate a kidney down to the very last details, right? And we can simulate that on a computer. But he says, as good as the kidney simulation is, your computer is not going to start urinating on your desk. That's supposed to be funny. Okay, anyway, so that you get the idea. So now what he says is biology is the key. Metabolizing organisms are the only entities with conscious experience. He said, if you look out at the world, not conscious, not conscious, not conscious, the only things that are conscious are biological beings, beings that have a metabolism. And he says, we see that as the metabolism breaks down, so does the consciousness. We call that death. And so basically, consciousness only is found in the world, in biological beings. And so he goes on to say that basically we need to build conscious beings. And as he says here, that there's no reason to expect that flipping switches is going to bring about consciousness. He's not alone. There are many big thinkers that believe like him. I would like to add one point to this, and that is to go back to the Torah and see that, the Torah says in many places, the blood is in the soul is in the blood is the soul is the blood. So there's something very connected between consciousness, soul, and blood. The Ramban says, what is all this business? The soul is in the blood is in the soul. What is this? So he says, basically, it's many different ways of saying you're not going to find a creature with a soul that doesn't have blood. You need to have biology. You need to have, if more precisely, a circulatory system. Okay? And Rav Isidore Grunfeld, who was the chief rabbi of England few decades ago, he says the Torah's dictum for the blood is the soul does not mean that blood is identical with soul. What it means is that the blood is the seat of life, which in turn is governed by the soul. Okay, so what he's saying is, again, you need a biological being. You need a being that has blood, circulatory system, and that will allow the infrastructure to hold a soul or consciousness. And so in 2012, an engineer, a professor at the UK, went and built a biological brain. He said, you're right, I agree, you need to have biology. And so he took 100,000 rat neurons, he grew them in a petri dish, and he hooked up probes to them, and he got responses. He made the first very rudimentary biological brain. I mean, just to give you an example, that human beings are said to have on the order of 100 billion neurons. So 100,000 neurons is a pretty primitive brain. But he managed to get things to react. Fast forward to 2023, and now this is a whole huge field called organoid intelligence. Okay? There's a guy by the name of Sergiu Pasca at Stanford University, and he has found that you can take skin cells. I'll just scrape some skin from you. I will convert them to stem cells. Stem cells mean I can make anything. And now I will make brain cells and I would build a brain. Let's see what he has to say in his TED Talk. This is just 2 minutes.
So in the last minute, let me show you the most complicated circuit we have built to date. The circuit that controls voluntary movement. To do this, we've created 3 organoids. One, shown here in purple, that resembles the cortex, one in yellow that resembles the spinal cord, and one in red that resembles human muscle. We then put them together and watch them fuse. And notice something really spectacular. Neurons on the cortical side started extending axons, find spinal motor neurons in the spinal side, connect with them, and then those farther project and connect to muscle. When we put a light stimulus on the cortical side, we notice the muscle on the opposite side contract. We have modeled for the first time a human cortical motor pathway.
That's insane. In case you didn't understand what they just did, they basically built a rudimentary model of a human being. They built brain cells. They built the nerve system and they built muscles and they got them to react like human beings. Okay? That's insane. Now, they're not actually trying to build Frankenstein, but they have made the basis for it. What they're trying to do are make, instead of testing drugs and therapies on rats, you can test them straight on human organs. Okay, so it's a huge boon for medical development. The problem is that if you buy what I told you, which I truly believe and have written about, is that if we build a biological brain, it will have consciousness with feeling and pain and pleasure. And are we supposed to be doing such a thing? But anyway, we fast forward to 2025. There's also people at Johns Hopkins University. I'll just show you 30 seconds of this.
What if the next computer wasn't built from silicon, but from living brain cells? Scientists just grew a tiny brain in a lab and it learned to play Pong in 5 minutes. This breakthrough is happening right now at Johns Hopkins University and labs across the world. They're called organoids, mini human brains grown from stem cells. Each one is only the size of a pea, but packed with over 100,000 living neurons. And here's the mind-blowing part. When connected to a computer game, these mini brains figured out how to move the paddles without any programming, just pure trial and error, like a child learning to play. Think about efficiency. Your brain runs on just 20 watts. That's less than a light bulb.
Okay, so you get the idea. This isn't just some fringe thing, and it's not something that needs another breakthrough. People are building organoid brains from stem cells, and nobody's getting killed, nobody's getting anything, but they're building people. Okay, so now, as I said, there are 3 primary approaches: the infocentrism that thinks you can just get supercomputers and consciousness will emerge; physiocentrism, which means you need the physics of electromagnetic fields, etc., and biocentrism, who say we'll build them out of biology, which is literally happening now. So that's basically the review of machine consciousness. It's a field that's, by the way, been around since the 80s, 1980s, and now it's really taken on speed. And that brings us to the last and final section. Should we be doing this? Okay, so why would we want to make conscious machines? So if we ask Henry Ford, so Henry Ford said as follows: the great industrialist, he knows how to build machines. For most purposes, a man with a machine is better than a man without a machine. That basically describes why human beings, from Noah, who made the plow, that we are going to read actually this week's Parsha, we have been making technology because people with technology do much more than people without technology. Okay, so that's why we're doing this. And now I would add that engineers today add to Ford's adage, and a man that is a machine is best of all. I mean, if people could do everything, so now you can have machines that help the people. If we have the machines that are people, then we're good to go. And in fact, conscious machines, if you look it up in the literature, they're called the holy grail of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has as its goal to build people. I mean, you can see it in the mission statement of the Dartmouth Workshop from 1956. That has always been the goal. We'll build human beings that can do our work for us. And if you think that's crazy, here is Hod Lipson. Hod Lipson is the director of Creative Machines Lab at Columbia University. So now I brought you Stanford, Johns Hopkins, and now Stanford, Columbia. Yimach Shemam. A conscious machine is bigger than curing cancer. If we can create a machine that will have consciousness on par with a human, this will eclipse everything that we've ever done. That machine itself can cure cancer. So now you understand why we would want to do such a thing. We can get machines to do far more than we're capable of doing. So then, if that's so great, so why not? I mean, why shouldn't we build machines that will cure cancer? So remember, I said that if they're conscious, so they experience the world, they understand the world, they can think about the world, and maybe they don't want to cure cancer. Maybe I'm not so interested in oncology. I want to play basketball. So we could probably convince the one robot that will cure cancer. We'll tell him, listen, this is just an amazing thing. You'll save humanity. And so we'll convince him. No problem. What about all the other robots that we're going to build to do all what's called the 3 Ds of robotic? Meaning we build robots to do dull, dirty, and dangerous work. That's why you build robots. Okay, we need one for cancer. The rest of them, we want them to clean up. We want them to do everything that we don't want to do. So now, why would we do that? I mean, of course, why would we do that? Because we want slaves. But then we already agreed that slavery is not a good thing. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about conscious beings that feel pain and pleasure, and you're going to force them to do your work. That's slavery. Okay? So that brings us to the next question. So most writers, almost every writer except one that I wrote against, says that you can't make slaves. Okay? But what about children? What about friends? What about just other beings for companionship? So the idea about children is actually very interesting. There's a guy by the name of Julian Savulescu. He wrote a paper in 2001 called Procreative Beneficence, meaning we should be procreating for the best child beneficently. Nobody disagrees that you want to have the best possible child that will have the best possible life. I mean, you could disagree, like, oh, I think he'll have a better time being a doctor or being a basketball player, but you want your kid to have the best possible life. So Julian Savulescu says that today, not with computers, but today with IVF and PGD and all the genetic engineering, we can select and make the perfect baby. And he says not only that, he says that if that's true, you are morally obligated, because we all agree it's best to make the best child possible. And so now if you have the possibility to do that, you are morally obligated to do that. Now, many people wrote against him. One of the arguments against is that these are very expensive and difficult and painful procedures. And so it's not so simple to just say, oh, here, pick a good baby. So many people push him aside. However, John Danaher, who's a big name in the AI ethics game, so he says now today, he wrote, I think in 2019, he says today we can make robots, conscious robots, okay? And they can be the perfect baby. We can program to be exactly the kind of being that we want, a perfect being. Okay? And so that's the argument here, is that, okay, we can't make conscious robots to be slaves, but we can make them to be perfect babies, perfect human beings, moral, strong, fast, etc. So now I would like to bring Jewish thought to try to answer this question. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And to do that, I want to use the golem. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the golem is a conjured being that you take some dust you say some incantations with some letter permutations, and you bring to life a being. Did it happen? Did it not happen? Irrelevant. The question is, how does Judaism look at these beings? Okay? So, if you go through Moshe Idell's book, The Golem, you will see he brings all the golems in Jewish literature. It's a big, thick book. There are three types of golems. There's one that has what's known as chiyut, a kind of life force. It doesn't really feel anything. It's like a zombie. Okay, it's like ChatGPT on legs. Then there is most of them have a nefesh, meaning like an animal soul. They have feeling, but they are not so smart. And then there's one golem in all of Jewish literature that actually has a neshama, a human soul, second order phenomenal consciousness. So let's read that source now. In the interest of time, I will not read it in Hebrew. I brought this source in English for you, but if somebody really demands, I'm happy to read it in the Hebrew and translate. Okay, so this is the story. It's in a manuscript in the Vatican. Don't know why it's there. Anyway, it's dated from between the 9th to 11th century. It says as follows. Ben Sira wanted to study Sefer Yetzirah, this mystical book of creation, alone. A heavenly voice came out and said, two are better than one, meaning you can't learn this book alone. You need somebody else. So he went to the prophet Jeremiah, who was his father, and they studied the book for 3 years, following which a man was created for them, and upon whose forehead it said, Hashem Elohim Emet. Some of them it just says Emet, depending on the version of the Midrash. But anyway, Hashem Elohim Emet, the Lord God is true, is a verse from Jeremiah. Okay? So it says on his head, the Lord God is true. Now, in his hand was a knife, and he was erasing the aleph of Emet. Okay, so now if you erase the aleph of Emet, the aleph that's in the word true, you get the word dead, met. And so basically it said, the Lord God is dead. Gershom Shalom wrote, it's very interesting that Nietzsche's famous cry, God is dead, went up first from the mouth of a golem in the 9th century. Now, it's actually very important why he's saying this. So now we go on and it says like this. Jeremiah cried out, why are you doing this? We just spent 3 years making you, 3 years making you. Now you're going to kill yourself? He answered them, the golem answered, I will tell you a parable. There was a man who was an architect and wise, such that when the people recognized this, they coronated him king over them, right? They didn't know how to architect. And so this architect came and said, look, this is how we build wonderful buildings. And so they said, wow, you're so smart, you're king. In time, others came and learned the art such that the people left the former and followed the latter. So all of a sudden, after some years, other people learned to architect, and so other people said, oh, wow, you're better architects. We'll go with you. Similarly, God looked into the book of creation, Sefer Yetzirah, and he created the world such that all creations coronated him king. Now, says the golem, when you two came along and made a man just like God did, what will the end be? They will leave God and they will follow you. So basically what he's arguing, that the golem is saying, I need to kill myself because if people know that you were able to create a human being like God did, everybody's going to become atheist. So now this isn't the greatest argument for us today when half the world is already atheist. And also anyway, the fact of the matter is that, if you think about it, even if we did create a conscious being, it's not yesh mi'ayim. It's not something from nothing like God did. It's something from something. But anyway, there's a theological problem. People could become less religious with humans creating humans. But the story goes on, and it says the people will leave God and they will follow you. And so he who created you, what will become of him? They said to him, if so, what can we do? The golem answered, reverse the sequence of letters you used to create me. They reversed the sequence, and the man became dust and ashes. So what I want to say from this story, we're almost done. There's like 2 more slides. It's okay. That's my wife. So what I want to say from this story is that it's clear that we're not happy with people making conscious beings. That's clear. But to get an even better sense of that. The most famous golem story, the first one that appears in all of Jewish literature, is in a Gemara in Sanhedrin. It says as follows: Amar Rava, I ba'u tzadikei, ba'u baru alma. It's Rava is a big rabbi, and he said if the righteous of the world wanted to create a world, they could do it. And now he brings you a verse to prove it. That was his claim. Righteous people can create the world. How do I know that? Because there's a verse that says, Shneimar v'ki avonotechem hayu mavdilim beinechem lebein Elohechem. Because what separates you, people, from God are your sins. The reason that we are not God is because we sin. So, if we don't sin, we have the capacities of God. That's Rava's claim. Okay? Now, this seems to me that this is already a setup for failure. The Gemara is already telling you this can't be, because we know Rashi says here, the righteous. Who are the righteous? Not nice people you know. Oh, look, isn't he a tzaddik? He gave staka. No. This is much bigger than that. Tzaddik liyot neki'im mikol avon. We're talking about righteous, clean of all sin. Zero sin. Now you can be like God. So obviously, we don't need Kohelet to tell us, but he does. Ki adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yichateh. There is no such person. So I believe already the Gemara here is setting this up to tell us you can't do this. But Rava is not convinced, and he goes on to create a man. V'Rava bara gavra. Rava actually made a golem. He made a man. Shadre lekame the Rabbi Zera, and he sent it to his friend Rabbi Zera. Havaka mishtai bahade, and so Rabbi Zera said, "Hello, who are you? What do you want from me?" Then when it said, "Velo havaka mehadarle," and the golem did not answer. So Rabbi Zera said, "Amarle min chavraya ata hadar la'afrecha." He said, "You are not a human being. You are from my friends that conjured him of a being. Return to your dust." And so that's what happened. The golem was returned to dust, and that's the end of the story. We never hear about the golem again. If there was any interest, if there was any belief that a golem, a conscious being, should be made, we should have heard about him again. So we also have the golems of the Middle Ages, and they also all ran amok. And so what I want to say is, in conclusion, that we should not be making conscious machines. We learned that from the golems throughout the Middle Ages that all went haywire and had to be shut down. We learned that from Rava's golem that Rab Zera turned back to dust. We learned that from Ben Sira and Jeremiah's golem, who said, "You shouldn't be making me." And so in conclusion, from the Jewish sources themselves, I believe that we should not be making conscious beings. If we want to make conscious beings, we should make them the old-fashioned way. This is me and my wife many years ago. Thank you very much.
We are thanking Rick for your presentation. Fascinating. So what my thought is that at this point, the AI seem to be getting so advanced that Golem is not going to be the thing we'll be working on. We are already working beyond that. So having AI created what we call humans, whether they are or not, we could be a Jurassic Park.
That's true. You're 100% right, but you're bringing up a different problem. I'm talking about conscious golems, and which is an issue which I believe I've covered. You're talking about other problems like these catastrophic possibilities that AI would take over, etc. It's true. These are other lectures, right?
So I understood you to say, though, that AI will never get to consciousness. That'll come through a biological approach, not through AI.
Correct. 100%. I'm just saying that if we build organoids, we will get them. right now, 100,000, there'll be, 100 billion. It's a matter of time. That's artificial intelligence. That's where the artificial consciousness. You're 100% right that there are many issues with artificial intelligence, but I also believe that many people are working on trying to contain it so that we can use it for the good. But you're right. It's a question. Go ahead.
I appreciate what you're saying very much, but you didn't really talk about what's the fundamental question. I think this would be wonderful as long as you accept that my definition of best is best.
That you're what?
My definition of what's best is best. My definition of morality is best, but yours may not be mine.
Correct.
And the question is, how do we define and set up what is moral, what is best, what is that? And that's the sort of thing that I think is left out and is most dangerous of what's going on.
Okay, correct. You're talking about morality in general and how do we define what's right and wrong. I think that's really the ultimate question of humanity. We just read in the creation of Adam and Eve, right? The Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch has an amazing explanation about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he says, the snake said, God doesn't want you to eat from this tree because when you eat from it, you'll become like God. But then when they ate from it, did they become like God? Did they create worlds? No, they did not. But God says they have now eaten and they have become like one of us. They have become a God. So what exactly did they become when they ate that tree? So ate that fruit. So that doesn't tell us what the fruit was because it's irrelevant. The fruit is not a magic fruit. You don't eat it and become powerful. What happened is it's the act. The minute that Adam and Eve took the fruit that God said, don't do this, they became God. What is a God? A God is the being that defines what is right and what is wrong. And God said, it is wrong to eat from this tree. And the people said, no, it's not. Looks good, feels good, tastes good. I want it. And so that is the challenge of humanity, is to put the fruit back and let God decide. It's not so simple, but I believe that the Torah and all of the oral Torah and all of the Sheilot and Tshuvot throughout history are trying to give us a moral framework based on God's will. Okay? There are arguments here and there, but I would still say, and that's why I believe strongly, and that's how I started this talk, that Judaism has a framework to address these moral issues, which I believe are good not just for the Jews, but for the world. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the concept of evaluate, you had the ability to potentially have conscious thought. But it's still within the confines of programs. So, I don't envision anything where we can have free thought, because the thought that's contained there is restricted. Our consciousness is not restricted.
So all I'm saying is very simple. We're building a brain like ours. That's what it looks like to me. So whatever your brain can do, this organized brain can do. It's not limited.
So it's not emulating?
No, it's completely replicated. It's basically like making a clone.
Okay, we have so many different brains.
Correct.
How can you?
Okay, so you can program. Let's say you can tweak things. You can program it to have certain characteristics, but nevertheless, it's going to have free thought. It's going to have consciousness.
So it's not a programmed consciousness.
It's not programmed consciousness, but just like I'm programmed in the sense that I'm intrigued with engineering and other people aren't. So, okay, I'm programmed in a way, but I have free consciousness. Right? That's more or less what we're talking about. You can program traits, but it still doesn't limit its consciousness.
So I guess my question is, we may all agree that what you've presented in terms of Jewish thought and what we should do would be the right way to go. But so what?
So,
So I'm like, I mean, who else is gonna do that? What keeps this from going? We're very big, a lot of people. It's hard to see where is your thinking is going to influence.
right. So, okay. I agree. I am a philosopher. I have an opinion. I wrote a piece. I published it, and it says, don't do this. Okay. That's not going to do a lot. But it's added to many, many people in the industry who are saying this. I'm not the only one, and people are bringing different arguments from different places. So I'm just another piece in the puzzle, and I hope that that will influence thinkers who are making decisions. It turns out that I'm also a national advisor to the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Israel. So when discussions like this come up, so I have my piece and I bring forth these ideas. And yeah, I think that governments, just like governments banned cloning, we should be banning building people. The problem is, like I said, that there is this, if we contain it and you make just a small organ, we can do a lot of medical testing without killing people, right? And so we need to try to find that balance. Anything else?
Question you're going to have. Hold on. I can drop the
Oh, okay.
In the biblical story, God destroyed Megillah Babel because if humanity were to succeed in its endeavor to appropriate God's power, nothing that they will want to do will be withheld from them. AI seems to have been created from similar ambitions. As an all-knowing angular intelligence that is not just a tool, but a non-human being with the capacity for independent agency, including the possibility to override the agency of humans. People are already getting encouraged to consult bandwidth independent on this unnatural entirety in godlike fashion, even though it's an artificial human creation. From a Jewish perspective, how is AI not pure ideology, and therefore how is engaging with it not especially forbidden? Regarding the Golem tradition, it was intended as a temporary agent evoked only when the Jewish people were in grave danger. It was not meant as a permanent and persuasive fixture in human life as AI's become.
Okay, I didn't get the last sentence, but I'm not sure it's critical. The thing is like this, okay? There's an example of the Tower of Babel. And God came down, and these people were using technology, but it wasn't the technology that God came down to destroy. God came down and said, oh, let's see what are these people doing. And he decided to destroy them because they were doing it against God. If we use technology to make the world a better place, God is not against that. We are going to read that in this week's Parsha of Noah. Noah was chosen because he made the first technology. His name is Noah because he brought comfort to the people by making their dreary work of agriculture a little easier. Rashi and the Radak, who are quoting the Midrash, say he made the plow. God was not against that, just the opposite. God chose him because he knew how to make a plow. He knew how to develop technology. He knew how to make human life better. Building the Tower of Babel was exactly idol worship because they built the tower to say, we don't need you, God. Look, we can get to the sky. We can do whatever we want. Technology against God is idol worship. Idol worship is not bowing down to sticks and stones. Idol worship is rejecting God. Idol worship is saying, I know better. Idol worship is taking the fruit from the tree. So AI is not doing that. There may be people who are doing that with it, but AI in and of itself is a technology that can help humanity progress and do great things. It can also do bad things, and that's why we need to have these kinds of discussions and try and find a framework so that we don't destroy ourselves.
There's another question from online. What about programming a machine that emulates a sense of humor as a stepping stone towards developing consciousness?
We develop a machine that understands humor, and this is going to help us make a conscious machine. I mean, no, I think that what there's a confusion is that you have to be conscious to make humor. You have to be conscious to appreciate humor, right? I will laugh now because you said something funny, but the machine can make humor that's already been shown, right? They can make jokes, which is an astounding level of artificial intelligence. But again, it's just putting symbols together.
Thank you, Louise. That was wonderful. On behalf of ASU Jewish Studies, Valley Beit Mirash, and Congregation Or Zion, I would like to thank you for joining us.